We're ready to reconvene, and we are at item number 6, or no, sorry, we're still in 5, 5B, Director Day.
And the next item is in particular the systems discussion with Mr. Glenn.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I appear before you today to talk about the procurement process and the team recommendations for the selection of 2 applications which will be critical to the business processes of the Commission going forward. The Commission identified the need for an enterprise content management system, and if I will try not to use acronyms, but that's what we do in technology is we use acronyms. Some of you may know it as a document management system, and also a licensing management system. And suffice to say, the licensing management system will be the automation of the process around taking the regulations which you just discussed and making them part of the business process for taking in applications, reviewing those applications, and approving them. So following the Commonwealth's process for procurement, 2 teams made up of members both of the Commission and staff employees conducted procurements for a content management system and for a license management system. And that was done over a number of months. The reports of both of those procurement teams are in your packet, and as well as the recommendation. I would say, you know, this is week 2, day 3 for me, but I was invited early on to participate, even before I came on board, in some of the processes and the deliberations and the due diligence around looking at these vendors, their solutions, and how they met the needs that were defined by the teams. So, you know, I'm here today to support the recommendations of both of those teams. They were made independently, and so that's basically where we are. We have a budget, which we are going to recommend that we move forward with, and project plans, which we will also discuss. So that's what I'm looking to cover today. We can move to the next page, please. So I put this chart in here just to demonstrate. This is a Gartner chart. I call it the Magic Quadrant. Up in the upper corner, upper quadrant, the right quadrant, are the leaders in the industry in the area of document and content management. And my point here is that the vendor that we selected, as well as a number of the vendors that we looked at, are in this quadrant. So I think you can have confidence that the recommendation of the team is for the vendor which we've chosen is one that is a leader in the industry and is well established. Next slide, please. So we can, let me take a step back. So both procurements, while done independently, came to a conclusion to select a platform that was provided for by both vendors, excuse me, a platform for enterprise content management and license management by the same vendor. So we're lucky enough to have chosen EMC as the foundational platform for the software to put the content management on top of. In addition, the licensing management system, the case management system, is also an EMC product. So in total, I think we have a solution that we can build upon. What you have before you here is the financial recommendations for the expenditure in order to undertake this project, the 2 projects. And as you can see, there's a licensing cost. There's a cost for the infrastructure and the hardware to put that software on. And there's a cost for the engagement of a consultant to help with the configuration of the licensing management system only. I would emphasize that we are procuring a platform here which is configurable, and work needs to be done in order to make it fit the needs of the commission. And so we are partnering with a vendor on the state contract to help us do that configuration.
And the costs of the configuration are included in this chart, correct?
So the cost of the configuration of the initial functionality of the license management system is what you see at the bottom of the chart. That's $622,000 for that configuration work. The document management, the work around the document management system.
You mean 625 over the 4-year period?
So sorry.
The bottom.
Yeah. So
I think.
on the bottom of the chart, it's 622, I believe.
Yes.
222,000 and 400,000.
So before the end of the fiscal year, we'd be looking at 622,000 plus 696,000?
That is correct. Although the capital cost could be, the $300,000 in hardware is an estimate. And it could be a capital outlay, or we could work it out to be part of the operating cost. But the initial investment in total that we're looking for, excluding the additional consulting work that's going to be necessary for the document management system, because that's TBD, and the integration, the complex integrations necessary for the licensing system, that is also TBD. So if you take this piece by piece, the first piece is the licenses, okay? So we're purchasing a number of licenses to be able to use the application. That's the $400,000, along with maintenance and training in the out years. That's the seats to be able to use the document management system and the licensing management system. The costs are combined. The second piece is the hardware necessary to put the software on and run it, okay? So those are, you can consider that the software and the infrastructure costs. And then the consulting, we're still figuring out some of the work that needs to be done. For the document management system, we know what functionality we need, but in order to customize it, or to configure it, I should say, to meet the needs of the commission, work is going to need to be done. We've targeted 2 areas that we want to initially use the document management system for. One is for the ingestion of all emails, so that there's a FOIA-able archive and forensically discoverable of all communications that the agency has. Secondly, would be to replace the current SharePoint system and use the document management system to take in the applications as we move into the next phase. So those 2 pieces are TBD. Again, we have a platform. We're trying to figure out the amount of work necessary to do that. We think those 2 things can be done in relatively short order. More complex use of the document management system for things such as putting resumes in and creating business processes around hiring, those things are to be determined.
How about just regular storage, retrieval, and sharing of documents among commissions and commission staff? Is that to be TBD too?
So I think it is TBD. Currently, we use what many businesses use. It's a shared drive of, it's a basic, a common repository that with no security, no levels of delineation. So I think the answer is yes. We will look to structure the document management system, and my analogy here would be it's a filing cabinet. So we will structure it to contain content in the various areas that we need to share information, and also areas that we don't. For instance, human resources, they would have an area where information related to HR could be stored, without other people having access to it. So I think we would transition from using a shared content area, such as we do now, to using the document management system.
And would the document management system be also the repository for the individuals, for each individual's documents that were created?
I think that's to be determined. Right now, we currently use a secure folder that's related to email
Right.
that is assigned to each individual, and it's only available to that individual because of the way that it's set up. So I'm not sure that we get to, I think we will use the content management system for enterprise content. Maybe individual people will continue to store on what we call their shared drive.
Okay, that's TBD, but for FOIA purposes, searchability of individual files, non-email files, is likely to be a helpful thing. Anyway, we can talk about that.
I would look to the general counsel to determine what documents would need to be indexed and searchable, and we would look to repose those in the document management system as opposed to the shared drive.
Right. One other question. Have we looked at having somebody else host these systems?
We
And
have.
the cost of that?
So we are in the process, we have defined the hardware requirements, and we are in the process of talking with a number of companies that do this type of service, and we also plan to talk with the Commonwealth, which has services also in co-location and hosting.
So is that,
And if we got somebody else to host it, would we replace would the hardware cost disappear and be replaced by a servicing cost, a service cost?
I don't want to get too technical, but so there's a number of options for hosting. We can buy the hardware, and what we would pay for would be space in somebody's data center, and the hardware would reside there. We would have access to it, so we would own the hardware, and we would be paying an ongoing operating cost for electricity and the space and the security and the access for telecommunications. So, and there's also the option of using a vendor to fully configure the software. They would do everything. My initial review of the offer of one of our vendor partners, that cost is not a reasonable cost at this time.
Okay.
But that answer to the question is yes. John's put in an estimated infrastructure cost, but the cost, whether it's to store it or to purchase it outright, that cost will still be there in some form.
In some, yeah.
I believe that purchasing 100 licenses for content management and 75 for licensing management are too many at this point. You're also projecting another on year 3 to double that. I'm not sure that everybody that needs access to these, first of all, I don't know that everybody in the commission will need access to these systems. It may be more for content management, but even so, I'm not going to be, I'd like to understand why we need so many licenses, first of all. Let me put it that way.
So I think for document management, every person who is going to use the system is going to require a seat, on a user basis. And so that's the way we did the matrix that you see there in terms of allocating the licenses. I can tell you that in discussions over the last week with EMC, the cost of spreading out the procurement of the licenses over a period of years is significantly more than buying a number of licenses we think we're going to use over the ensuing 4 years, to the tune of over $200,000. So I think we've looked to moderate the cost, Commissioner, but I think what I'm saying is if we buy less now, it's not going to save us money in the long run in terms of managing it. If we think we're going to use 100 licenses in the out years, it's smart to make that decision for the next couple of years or 3 years.
That may be the case, but I'm not even convinced that we need to have 100 licenses, whether it's year 1 or year 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
Or, that's what I really would like to test. That's certainly true for licensing. I don't know, I'd really like to understand just how many people will have access to the licensing system. It occurs to me that many of us, commissioners, other people in communications, et cetera, by design will not have access to that system.
I think
We may get, hopefully, reports and appeals and things like that, but it occurs to me that 75 licenses to be doubled on year 3 may be too many.
So I think we're still working out the finalization of the contract. It's prudent, I think, to go back to David and to work with Rick to look at the license counts. I can tell you that as we reduce the number we purchase, the costs will go up. That's just the model of the way the vendor is. I'm not saying that we shouldn't. I think what we tried to do was the chart below the 175 shows the allocation over the 4 years of the licenses and what we thought we were going to use. But I'm perfectly willing to go back and look at utilization again and try to reduce the numbers.
Yeah, no, and I don't want to belabor a point, but the cost per license might go up, but the overall cost, I hope, does not go up by reducing the number of licenses. I think the overall cost should go down. It's just like, what marketeers would like to have us believe, the more you buy, the more you save. I've never taken that to be the case.
Yeah, so I'm agreeing with you, and I think we'll take another pass at trying to estimate the utilization and get the vendor to provide us pricing based on that.
It's pretty straightforward, just to see what's behind these 175 numbers and to see if that seems to make sense or not. Pretty easy to figure that out.
We don't have 100 people in the whole commission at this point, so I don't know why we're buying 100 licenses on year 1.
Okay, so we'll
Well,
check that out.
which was getting me to the larger point, which I just like to bring up. So we're looking at a 1.3 million when we add in this fiscal year plus additional costs to be determined. Is that correct for email and category 1 applications, document management?
That's what my math has as well. So I think that's important that at this point, it's a 1.3
Million commitment.
It's an estimate.
Yeah, right.
And there would be, if we continue to move forward with the document management system, there would be additional configuration costs.
Right. The budget that we have from last few months had us, I assumed a lot less, a number a lot smaller for that figure. Just wanted to kind of bring you up to date on that matter.
Well, and we are gonna take a look next week at the overall situation, so the overall cash situation in the budget report next week, which is important.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, the last budget we looked at was for the year.
Yes.
I know we've made a series of assumptions, and even with those assumptions, there are some issues down the road. And if this is higher, as it strikes me it is,
It is higher. Yeah.
substantially higher.
And it's both systems, though.
No, I understand that. I'm not being critical of this in isolation. It is what it is, and we've got a good vendor, and it's good that we got a vendor that can do both, but the dollar piece still remains.
Yeah, no, the figure that I assumed was 750,000 for this fiscal year for both systems. And to some degree, we've already spent a little bit when we wrote the requirements. So no, we're looking at a good enough delta that we need to consider whether purchasing 100 licenses up front may be prudent with our cash flow.
Well, I guess this is one thing, from my perspective, I'm recommending that hopefully the commission will delegate its authority to proceed in negotiating, because I think what the commission would want, and I know what we do, is whatever breakdown gives us the best cost in the product itself. And I think there is a question with the licenses, exactly how much money we're going to save or lose, and how fast we move forward. But I do think there's room to move, but I think it's ultimately in that final contract negotiation with the providers.
And you know, my experience with some of these, perhaps was not a very good experience, but some of these costs tend to escalate from the initial estimates because there's additional configuration that we didn't anticipate, additional integration. You know, the more users we have, the more user requirements we will likely get. So I would be a lot more in favor of stipulating and thinking about a contingency, say, with less licenses. We may end up in the same overall dollar amount, but understanding that some of these costs could escalate by their very nature. You know, some of them are even not determined at this point. But my intention is to have a budget status report by next week, now with the help of our CFO.
So do you need some authorization today, or you?
So we have already,
Yeah, the answer to the question is yes. And I think to keep this project moving forward and try to keep it on the timeline at all, we need to begin final discussions with these contractors and continue to allow them to help us here in the meantime, so we can keep moving forward without too much delay. We're already off a few days as we move forward.
So what are you looking for specifically, Rick?
I'm looking for a approval of the acceptance of the providers, and then hopefully delegated authority from the commission to move forward with negotiations on a final contract with the providers.
Okay. Well, my take of this conversation is that we're completely comfortable with the decision on the provider, and we're completely comfortable with going ahead and negotiating with them. There's at least one outstanding question about some of the suppositions in here, particularly having to do with the licenses. And I think before that decision gets done, we'd like to see the backup. You know, what's the thought process behind the number of licenses that we're paying for, cost and number, and that's something you can put together pretty quickly. The commission would like to be able to make sure that we're comfortable with the assumptions behind that. But beyond that one particular thing, I think we're perfectly ready to authorize you to go ahead and get moving as quickly as possible.
Right.
Didn't quite sound like a motion. Does that sound right?
It
Right.
did.
All right.
Sounds-
I mean, I think the license thing is something, there's some assumption behind this. We can see that quickly, we can double check it, see if it makes sense, work it out, and then other than that, you guys are good to go. Do we need a motion to that effect?
I think we need a motion from the commission, yes.
Okay. Commissioner Zuniga, do you want to
Sure.
try to do that?
So in that case, I'll make a motion that this commission authorize Director Day and Director Glennon to accept the proposal submitted by EMC for delivery of their electronic content management and licensing management systems and begin negotiations towards executing a contract with some of the feedback that we have given them already.
I want to note that EMC's implementation partner on the licensing management system is NTT Data. For the record, they will be doing the system integration and the configuration.
Thank you.
EMC and its partners then, in the motion.
Well,
But are we authorizing John and Rick to not only enter negotiations, but conclude negotiations, subject to the one issue on the table about rethinking the assumptions behind the licenses? I think we are. So it's more than enter into. We're authorizing you to execute an agreement subject to that one critical data point that the commission would like to look at. So as amended.
well,
No, go ahead.
I'm reluctant to, I'm perfectly free with everything up to and including negotiations, but I'm troubled by the numbers here, because the numbers are, there's no context for the numbers. And that's not only where did these assumptions come from, but how does that number fit into our ability to pay for it? And so I would really like to take another look at this when we have the assumptions and when we have the budget that you have worked through and are comfortable with. I mean, it may be that we wind up that this is a greater priority than some other things, but maybe it's not.
Well, the one thing that I would note is there's of the two systems, there's one with a high priority, and that is the licensing system. They are not only working hard on the regulations, but working on a tight time frame to be able to receive requests for licensing as early as January. Is that, or, after award of a license, say for a Category 2. So I am in the same position. I'm really looking at the numbers and how that fits with our current cash flow and our ability to assess our applicants. So there's a very short time frame that we really need to analyze, and we could do that by next week. But if we hold both licenses, executing a contract with both licensing systems for another week, we lose a valuable week in terms of developing that particular system. Is that a fair statement, Director?
Yeah, it is, and I think, so we had proposed, because we've had a long process with the document management system too, and trying to get it up and running, so I've been telling the crew, keep document management, let's get it going. And so I think it's possible, if we needed to separate that to a certain degree, but we have the licensing system is the backbone infrastructure system for the commission to actually operate on, issue licenses, and eventually investigations in the whole process. So that's why I'm trying to convince everybody that we really need to be able to move forward with this negotiation, keep these people working on that process, and be able to negotiate a final contract.
I would add that there's crossover in the licensing. So even though these were two separate procurements, the fact that we've chosen EMC as a platform, some of the licenses for license management system are licenses to use the document content management system as well. So we've saved some money by dual purpose here. So I'm not sure you can separate and say we're going to negotiate the costs of procuring the license management licenses, user seats, and the enterprise content management user seats, because the economy is partly having them together.
I should also mention one thing, even before next week, which I can also highlight for next week. Our overall budget assumptions included a large number for a performance management effort that we have not yet executed, and that may still be in the horizon, perhaps even as far as next fiscal year. So there's, from a budgetary standpoint, there's enough capacity to pay for these systems at this point if we only postponed that performance management effort for a later date. I'll be able to highlight that in more detail, for the next meeting.
I think we've talked about, Commissioner Zuniga and I know you and some of the staff have talked about the overall cash. We're not in a cash position where we're running the risk of not being able to do what we need to do. We're going to have to be careful. We know that. But, the difference between, reconciling a little more carefully next week versus now, there's no crisis here that we need to worry about. And I think that the crisis we do have is the time crisis. And worst comes to worst, we can always tell vendors to stop work, but you can't make up time to lose. So in the context and with the points that you've made about the time and the fact that there are some offsets financially, we know there are tools to deal with cash issues if we have them. That I think it's very important to authorize them to empower them to not lose any time. And if we need to look backwards, we can always do that, but.
So did I hear correctly that there's not an economy of scale or time by proceeding with one licensing system versus both?
And I think that's what I think that John's addition, that's what we've been trying to convey too regarding the licensing is what we're attempting to do is find the best economy of scale for the commission from these providers. And John, if I understand what he said, is that by separating the two, we may lose some of that that economy of scale. And so I have, to answer the question on the performance management project, at least in planning-wise, we touched on a little bit in a critical chart start. We're not even going to be able to start that until spring from that perspective, to be helpful on that. But I think this system is one of those things that's is a critical path. And part of the question is, I don't know how else to put this, so I'll try this. If we were able to negotiate this and the license thing, we were able to save 100,000, or on the flip side, we not save 100,000, is this something that we would say don't move forward with? And from my perspective, I think it's something we have to move forward to get the agency up and running. And so we're committed on this end to negotiate, possibly in cooperation with commissioners, if they want to be part of that process, to come up with the most cost-effective proposal we can in the end for these two systems, but allow us to move forward and accomplish this part of the process.
Well, I'm fully on board. I mean, since I started this little detour, I'm fully on board with the necessity and the high priority we have to assign to both of these functions. That's clear in my mind. And I'm hearing from you, Commissioner, that we've got the money to pay for it, though that may mean we don't do something else. And so with that assurance, I'm on board. Because I do think we have to do this.
And probably, I know it was a little while ago, but probably the motion stands as I made it.
As you made it, right.
But amending, authorizing them to go forward, subject to the one significant issue of the number of licenses. So it's not just negotiating, it's concluding if you need that. Whatever you need to do to get the work on track and not stop, that's what we're authorizing you to do.
Right.
Subject to this one priority, one condition.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? You have a frown on your face.
No, I have a handle on all the issues. I was just wondering if I needed to second that.
Oh, yeah. Second that restatement?
Yes.
Go ahead.
That was the frown. I'll second
All
that.
right, thank you. I'm sure we can find a motion in there somewhere. All right, any further discussion? I think the intent is pretty clear. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, 5-0.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, now we're going to item 6, I believe. I think commissioners are getting crabby because it's lunchtime.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I will be brief.
Yeah, there you go.
I will. On October 3rd, the commission extended the deadline for petitions of surrounding community petitions on the Category 2 licenses, and I'm here to report that that extension has had very significant positive impacts. The applicants and communities have taken that time to work together and have numerous conversations to try to reach agreements rather than time spent coming up with the best petition for an adversarial process. As a result, in a number of different areas, we have agreements that have been reached or agreements that are about to be reached, and or that we've had a designation or designations of a new surrounding community. We've had situations where a community that wanted to become a surrounding community has since learned more data and has now determined that it would not become a surrounding community. And so I think that extension has served the applicants and the communities very well. While that is the case, we are expecting and we have received a number of surrounding community petitions. Some of those petitions may potentially be resolved in the 10-day period under which applicants can respond to surrounding community petitions. So even though the communities have determined that they need to protect their rights by filing those surrounding community petitions, a number of those potentially could be resolved within that 10-day period, and conversations continue. I just will note for both applicants and communities that an adversarial process is just that, as in at least one of the sides is likely to be upset with the result that comes from an adversarial process. So all sides should continue to consider the significant impacts of going for that adversarial process, and I know that they are doing so. So in regard to this, the Category 2 process, I think that there are some very significant lessons learned. The Commission knows that we have asked our Category 1 applicants to appear before the Commission next week. It was originally scheduled for this week, but there are a number of very significant events that are occurring over the next week where we thought it would make much more sense for the Category 1 applicants to come appear before the Commission next week. Of note, we've received a number of communities that have asked for extensions of our deadlines of 180 days. I think that the testimony by the category...
Say, which deadline is that, of 180 days?
So a number of communities have asked for just an extension of our application deadline by 180 days. And so,
Right.
so I think that the presentations next week will be very instructive as to how applicants are dealing with the very legitimate needs for data by communities, and how they are trying to have these conversations with communities in order to avoid the sort of the issues that we experience with the Category 2 application deadline. And hopefully our Category 1 applicants will learn from our Category 2 applicants, in that to the degree that there's uncertainty regarding data, there's lack of independent evaluation of whatever impact analysis that they have, that the Category 1 applicants should know that many communities might be in a place where they might otherwise file just to protect their legal rights because they don't know for certainty or near certainty what those impacts may be. And so to the degree that our Category 1 applicants can continue to try to work and provide those independent data streams that communities can be in a position of understanding, I think that that might go a long way to making this upcoming process one that is more manageable and works for both applicants and communities. So one thing that, second item on our agenda is when we extended the October 31st deadline for surrounding community petition status, there are a number of corollary items that probably also need to be considered. In our regulations, if a community reaches a surrounding community agreement with an applicant by the application deadline, that community is determined to be a surrounding community. Similarly, our regulations also require if a community has been designated as a surrounding community, basically by our application deadline, they have 10 days after our application deadline to submit their letter of assent. And so even though we've extended our surrounding community petition deadline to October 31st, there are these other categories that being tied to the application date, that they are now in the way of us being able to continue the conversations between applicants and communities. And so I'll let Catherine give you a little bit more about what we're requesting is that we allow for a variance in our regulations such that if an agreement is reached between an applicant and a surrounding community, but that agreement is reached after our application deadline, that we have the ability to receive that agreement, and that the community that has reached that agreement is a surrounding community. I think that's everyone's intent. You take a look at the legislation, and I think that follows what we should be doing as well. In regard to the assent, some communities may be designated as surrounding communities either after the application deadline or over the next couple of weeks. And what we're hoping for is that we could allow for those letters of assent to come after that 10-day period after the application deadline, such that if we receive them now, we can say you have assented to that designation, and the commission, that is satisfactory under our regulations.
What Mr. Ziemba is saying is true. I think the statute, the spirit of the statute and the regulations is that the applicant and the surrounding communities, or in the case of the impacted live entertainment venues, arrive at the best agreement between them. And we want to be able to accept those agreements after they've been negotiated, because as long as the parties can work that out, I think that's the best possible outcome. Our regulations tie the timing of some of our receipt to the submission of the RFA2 application. And so what we would propose is a variance from the timing in that regulation to allow the commission to receive both designations and assents within a certain period after today, and also to receive completed agreements between applicants and surrounding communities as the process unfolds. We just think that that covers really what the spirit of the statute and regulations provide.
And for the third category, we will receive a number of surrounding community petitions today, and we have received those. Our regulations already take care of those. In our regulations, if one submits a surrounding community petition, there's a process whereby the applicant can assent to that surrounding community petition, and once they assent to that surrounding community petition, then that community can become a surrounding community. So that process for that sort of third category of positions is already contemplated by the regulation. I don't believe a variance is necessary.
And by the same token, if they do not assent to it, the applicant does not assent to it, our regulations provide a procedure that gets kicked into place at the end of that 10-day period that requires us to take some action.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And then the final matter, I'm going to defer it for the discussion that Council Blue will talk to you about the impacted live entertainment venues. There is a section in our regulations in surrounding communities that prevents the commission from holding a hearing until after satisfaction of the surrounding community petition status at a hearing. But it's tied into a matter that will be discussed in a second, which is a parallel provision for impacted live entertainment venues.
Well, I think just to put it out there, both the regulations for both surrounding communities and for impacted live entertainment venues has a provision that you can't hold the statutorily required hearing sooner than 30 days after those designations are made for both surrounding communities and impacted live entertainment venues.
So we can't have the mandated host community agreement?
No, the hearing, the host community, the hearing in the host community under Section 17C
About the live entertainment?
for live entertainment and for surrounding communities sooner than 30 days after the commission has either designated or made determinations under surrounding communities, and in the same parallel manner for impacted live entertainment venues.
Mm-hmm.
So that would extend out significantly some of our timelines. So I would propose that the commission grant itself a waiver to that 30-day period, allowing it to have those hearings within a 30-day period, but perhaps making the designations or making the determinations, between now and a sooner time frame, maybe now and the next couple of weeks, whichever makes the most sense.
Is that 30-day requirement as opposed to the 30 days after the statutory hearing? Is the 30-day requirement you just talked about purely a matter of our regulations?
Yes. Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Thank you, Ellen.
Sounds fine to me. I mean, it's just sort of housekeeping, but the latter point is a little more substantive, but generally speaking, this is just kind of housekeeping, just neatening up.
I'm not sure it is housekeeping, because that statutory hearing, this would allow the statutory hearing to go forward, if I understand it correctly, before a surrounding community or impacted live entertainment venue agreement had been reached. right?
It could be, yes, or a determination made by the commission, that is possible,
Or
yes.
even a determination made by the commission as to whether a community was a surrounding community. But that statutory hearing, I've always viewed, and I may be wrong, was the opportunity for the commission to hear from and the applicant to respond to, hear the concerns of surrounding communities and impacted live entertainment venues, and for the applicant to respond to those concerns in a setting in the host community. Now, maybe we solve that if we adopt this regulation by not closing the hearing after we started. But that, I've always viewed that hearing as a big deal, in which all the parties got together and had an opportunity to talk and to respond to commission questions, and for the commission to really get a feel for what was going on, and not as some statutory formality.
The way the regulations are currently drafted, I believe that is what was contemplated.
I'm not sure that I'm following which hearings we're talking about now, so take this from the top. So the earlier stuff that John was talking about was what I thought was in the nature of housekeeping. This one is more substantive, but I'm not sure I understand how substantive. So run this by me again.
So maybe I could just read actually the language from the surrounding community. So pursuant to 205 CMR 125.01 2A, this is regarding surrounding community petitions. The commission will make a determination on the petition at an open meeting at which it may allow presentations or information from the applicant and the proposed surrounding community at least 30 days prior to the public hearing on the application held pursuant to MGL Chapter 23K, Section 17C. So that is the statutory host community hearing.
That's the hearing on whether to decide somebody's a surrounding community or not.
So what this
No.
requires is that you have to make your determination of surrounding community status at a hearing 30 days prior to being able to have your host community hearing.
Yes.
Right. So the hearing that he's talking about moving is not a statutory hearing, is it?
Yes.
Well, it would be if you don't have the 30 days in between, so.
Well, right, but
You're talking about a waiver that would allow us to ignore the 30 days between the designation of surrounding community and the statutory public hearing.
Yes, that's correct.
But that 30 days came from the statutory requirement that the the surrounding community and the applicant reach an agreement within 30 days of the designation of the surrounding community. There's a statutory requirement, a statutory space for that. And then, if they can't, a statutory requirement that the commission make a resolution of their inability to come together
within 30 days.
within another 30 days. So that's where the 60 days comes from. The reason for reciting that is that all of that was designed to have the surrounding community identification and agreement issues resolved before the statutory hearing, so that at the statutory hearing, the commission could deal with facts and not expectancies. You'd have the application completed, you'd have the impacted live entertainment venues issues completed, you'd know who they were, you'd know what the agreement was, and you'd have the surrounding community issues resolved. You'd know who they were, and you'd know what their agreement was, so that you could put all of those pieces together in front of the community where the establishment was to be located, and have a discussion that took into account all of those facts, not expectancies. This, and that's just by way of highlighting the implications of that waiver, because with that waiver, we would be throwing out all of those staging pieces, if you will, potentially, that would not have to be in place with the waiver before we had that statutory hearing. And I'm frankly troubled by that.
How can we waive the statutory? So
No.
how can we be,
No, it
how
would-
can we waive
we're
the
not
30
waiving
days?
that. The 30 days, the 30 days is in aid of, but not mandated by, the statutory requirement that the host community, the surrounding community, once designated by us, and the applicant come to an agreement, or the commission has to step in. But there's no statutory mandate that, for those 30 days. Those 30 days were put into the regulation to accommodate that
That larger
statutory,
process.
that larger process.
If I may, I believe, I'm sorry to interrupt, there's actually another 30-day period in the statute that's important to recognize here. And I think it's actually the reason we put those provisions into the surrounding community and impacted live entertainment section. And that is that, I don't have the statute in front of me here, but the statute requires that all surrounding communities, host communities, and impacted live entertainment venues be given 30 days notice of the public hearing in the host community. So we said, in order to accommodate that notice requirement, the determination has to be made 30 days in advance. So what Catherine and John are talking about would not compromise that if we provide notice to all of the applicants for surrounding community status and for impacted live entertainment venue status, even before they're formally designated. They'll still be provided with the statutory notice, even though they have not been formally designated. And that was, I believe, one of the, in addition to what Commissioner McHugh has just articulated, one of the reasons we put that provision in the regulations. Upon further review, it doesn't seem as essential as perhaps it did at the time, because we're still achieving what the statute really wanted, and that is to make sure that all of these entities had adequate notice of this public hearing, which is a quintessential part of the process, and to make sure that they're able to prepare. So, for example, one of these applications that comes in, you may not be prepared to designate one of these municipalities as a surrounding community for some period of time, because as we've discussed, once that designation is made, the clock starts. But if we provide the municipality with notice of the public hearing that we've already scheduled, and we provide them with more than 30 days notice, and we say, hey, look, there's going to be a public hearing in 30 days, get ready. Get ready to answer questions, to ask questions, to participate, then I believe we satisfy that provision of the statute and achieve really what the provision of the regulation that we're talking about waiving was set out to achieve. I don't know if that helps or muddies the waters.
No, that helps a lot, and which takes me back to what, well, I disagree with that, but I disagree with that being the purpose for which we created the 30 days, but that's ancient history. Well, could we still, in addition to that, could we still accomplish the goal that we're after with what you said, Commissioner, relative to not closing the hearing at the time that it takes place? We could do that, but we're basically creating the potential for two separate hearings, one of which is, we could do that. We could do that.
Without the waiver?
No, not without the waiver. We have to have the waiver in order to have
to eliminate that 30-day holding period,
Yes.
the 30-day spacer between the,
Designation. and
between the
hearing.
designation and the hearing. But we cannot, even though they get notice, everybody gets notice, we can't deal with the kinds of specifics that haven't occurred by the time the first hearing is held.
What,
So the-
In other words, to put it concrete, you have a designation of Town X as a surrounding community. You have the statutory hearing 15 days later. 15 days later, Community X and the applicant have not reached a surrounding community agreement. You have no way and then they've got proposals on the table, they may or may not ultimately reach the agreement, it may have to go to arbitration. You won't know that for some period of time. So at that statutory hearing, there's really no way you can deal with the specifics of the interchange between the surrounding community and the applicant, which various factions in the town, community, and surrounding areas may have something to say about once they hear what the details are. And so all of that would have to be reserved for a second hearing that could come as late as, may have to come as late as 60 days or 70 days after the first hearing. And maybe that doesn't mean you don't do the first hearing.
So that assumes that 30 days is the minimum required for a surrounding community to really negotiate and understand the details after they have been designated as surrounding community.
The statute, no, they could negotiate a host community agreement and be done with it in 5 days. I mean, they have 30 days to do it before the commission has to step in, but that's the outset. This waiver simply permits the commission to go forward with this statutory hearing, even if that surrounding community and impacted live entertainment venue agreement hasn't been negotiated. And you know, if it works out so that it is, that they all are done, fine. But if it works out that they aren't done, then I'm troubled by
but
having a hearing.
haven't we, this issue isn't just now coming up, that we've long ago crossed the bridge of having the possibility of surrounding community and also live entertainment venue agreements not be executed by the time of our host community hearings.
I must have been sick that day, because I don't
Because
remember.
we've talked about, well, we've now set up a situation where there's a petition comes in at the end of the day today, and we then have an infinite amount of time, we agreed, during which we can start, before which we start the 60-day clock going of the two arbitration periods.
Right.
But if we started the arbitration period, 1 day later, it would still be January 2nd, and the applications are due the 31st. So, I mean,
And that's why I say I was being a little facetious, but I may have misunderstood, because I always assumed that if those contingencies happened, the host community, the statutory host community agreement, host community meeting would be pushed back until all that had been done. That may simply have been my assumption.
where I was going on this. I thought, in my mind, we had crossed this bridge, that we know there's the wild card of the surrounding communities. And it's always been a factor that could delay our whole schedule.
Right.
Because at
That's right.
some point
That's right.
or another, we might decide that we have to stop evaluation or stop making a decision because we don't have some of these agreements done. It had never felt to me that the consequence of an unsigned surrounding community agreement or an unsigned live entertainment agreement was so substantive that it would defeat the purpose of the host community hearing. That, to me, that's a big jump. I mean, if you just think about the host community, the live entertainment and the surrounding community agreement are gonna get executed by an arbitrator, worst comes to worst, and neither we nor anybody else can change that outcome. It may be that some people like it and some people don't, which does have some modest impact on the, our assessment of community support. But A, we're gonna know that anyway, because the pros and cons are gonna be debated, we're gonna know about them, we're gonna hear about them in all kinds of different media. And B, in the big picture, it's very marginal in its impact. So that's all a long way of saying, in my mind, yes, we do run the risk that you have suggested of having a host community, mandated host community hearing prior to a handful of these these agreements being executed, but that is, in my mind, something we've already anticipated and absolutely not fatal to the process.
Well, I hear that, Mr. Chairman, I apologize because I didn't realize this issue was going to come up in this fashion today. I should have, I guess. But I thought there was also a statutory provision that says that the commission can't consider an application until that 30 days for the surrounding community agreement to be executed had occurred. Something along those lines. Am I wrong about that?
There is a provision in the impacted live entertainment regulation that says, and it somewhat
No, I'm talking about
conflicts.
I'm sorry, Counsel, I'm talking about the statute. And I thought that was another basis for what we were doing.
I think it says you can't issue a license until the determinations have been made. I don't know if it.
Should we ask Kevin?
He probably knows.
Well, I mean, this is,
Why is this,
The reason why we're bringing it today, and
yeah.
perhaps we can, I don't know if the executive director is going to kick me, perhaps we could talk about this next week. We anticipated December 3rd, 4th, and 5th for host community hearings. In order to get to December 3rd, 4th, and 5th for those hearings, we have to provide 30 days' notice of those hearings. And given the timetable, we would have to provide notice to communities to satisfy the statutory requirement tomorrow.
Yep.
So what we were anticipating we were going to do is that we are going to provide the hearing notice to all of those communities that have been designated, all that have reached agreement, and any surrounding community petitions that we receive today, we would provide notice to those communities that that hearing will take place on December 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And so by having that December 4th and 5th, I think what was anticipated is that we would have to basically reach a decision on whether or not those surrounding community petition communities are actually surrounding communities before December 3rd, 4th, or 5th, or else we would have to postpone that hearing. So I believe that there perhaps is some flexibility on December 3rd, 4th, or 5th, given some of the recent decisions regarding January 10th, so that December 3rd, 4th, or 5th would not necessarily need to occur.
But it seems to me that the issue is, we've come across a bigger issue. The issue of the 30 days, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we can waive the 30 days. But the issue is whether or not, at least, whether the commission is comfortable having the host community hearings without there being some possibly executed surrounding communities, whether there's a policy or statutory reason not to have the host community hearing while some of those agreements are still unexecuted. That's the bigger question here.
well, but we anticipated that some of them would not by
Well, we
by
did,
virtue of the arbitration.
We did, but Jim hadn't focused on that at least. I mean, which, it's clearly been implicit for months, but he was asleep at more than one meeting.
Well, in my mind, no, we looked at the alternative schedule line, took us well into,
Yeah.
a later date from the decision when we went through the arbitration process.
I agree, but this is just something that Jim hadn't focused on.
well, it's, I mean, that's, if I hadn't focused on it, I hadn't focused on it.
Yeah,
Let's have
no,
a vote. I mean, that's.
no, it's totally fine. I mean, that's what I'm saying, it's a bigger issue, and, you know, it's a non-trivial issue. You know, there could be some open data points, and should they,
Well, let me just go back to the statutory section. Section 17A, if the commission determines a city or town to be a surrounding community, and the applicant has not finalized negotiations with that community in its application pursuant to section 15, that's by the time the application is filed, the applicant shall negotiate a signed agreement with that community within 30 days, and no action shall be taken on its application prior to the execution of that agreement. That's where I was coming from, and that's what I understood, and perhaps misunderstood from the drift of our conversation. That was sort of an unstated assumption, that we could not take action on the application prior to the execution of the agreement. Now, in fact, we were going to do work on the agreement, but I certainly thought that formal statutorily mandated host community hearing was the kind of formal action that was contemplated by this section. And that's where, I must confess, that was part of
the application wouldn't even be in yet when we have the host community hearing.
No, it's in. We're talking about category 2.
These are category two.
Or did you understand action on the application to mean you couldn't decide on an
Yes.
award?
On an award.
Yeah,
That was my interpretation.
Well,
Yeah. Action as in deliberating or awarding.
Yes, and I thought that was what we were considering when we considered that there was an arbitration timeframe that could be past the date that we had discussed.
Well, I think this is the issue that we need to talk about rather than the 30 days. You know, the 30-day question will be a subset of this question. So let's talk about this question. Either as a matter of the statute, we can interpret the statute to mean takes no action means we can't have the host community hearing and really can't begin the evaluation process. Or we could say take action means the post, you know, when we are starting our deliberation process. When all the evaluation stuff is being done, it comes to the commission and we deliberate and make a decision. That are probably the two logical breakpoints for definitions of this. For what it's worth, in my mind's eye, I've been interpreting it as the more permissive definition. That, but if you forget what we thought ex post in the past, let's just think about it now going forward. You know, how big a barrier is it to our ability to do a good job of evaluating these proposals and of conducting that important mandated host community hearing? How big of an impediment is it to our ability to do those two things well, to not have some number, probably, of surrounding community agreements and possibly live entertainment venue agreements executed? That's the question.
yeah.
And I'm sorry, I have it in my mind, but not clearly enough. In the schedule, I believe we always contemplated, we didn't particularly pinpoint a date of hearings, but we always contemplated that the arbitration process would take us further.
But that's history now. We agree that was sort of what we
Fair enough.
contemplated.
I
So,
get your
but
point.
we never really looked at it from this standpoint, particularly with reference to the fact that there's a statutory section which
Well-
could be argued to take something to dictate a schedule different from what we've been contemplating. So whatever we all thought before, let's rethink it.
It was the subject of a lot of discussions on regs when we plotted that schedule, but
Yeah.
but I understand your point.
Okay. Well,
Could we come back to
commissioners-
these next week?
Tomorrow is the date they'd have to.
Well, if we're gonna we could, yes. I mean, it's not the end of the world if we don't do it second, third, and fourth. We do it 9th, 10th, and 11th, or whatever else it would be. We can do that. But if we can resolve this issue right now, it just keeps us more flexible, gives them the opportunity to do the second, third, and fourth if we want to. But, so what, let's talk about it. Commissioner Stebbins, Commissioner Cameron, to see
Yeah,
who
I
have
just,
thoughts
so
on this.
the legal team interpreted that to mean action, meaning deliberation and/or a finding or an award. Is that accurate? Is that how you've interpreted that?
That is how I've viewed it, yes, and that would be based on the statute and in conjunction with the schedule that we had originally put together.
Although certainly, I mean, Commissioner McHugh has a read on it, so we need, I
Yeah.
think we need to take a step back and look at this section of the statute. It's a very important section, an important decision that has to be made. I mean, it goes to the heart of what we're doing here, so I don't think it's really a voting situation for us.
Well, if we, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to, thinking through a practical solution to this, because I wasn't fully prepared for this, and maybe haven't been fully prepared for this discussion for months. But suppose we gave the notice tomorrow, which is what we'd have to do, and then took a look at this over the ensuing week and really thought it through and looked at it against the chart. And then at next week's meeting, either postponed the hearings or decided that the interpretation that apparently has been in existence is the proper one, and don't do anything and leave those dates in place. Wouldn't that be a practical solution to this?
And in the
give us some time to
think about it.
think about
And in the meantime, we could ask for comment, too. I mean, as long as we're at this, we might as well ask parties to comment if they want to. That does give us a week. Is that, what, the only negative with that, and I think it's utterly surmountable, would be that we would announce the second, third, and fourth. People would start to make plans, and a week later, we might change it, but such is life. Probably Ms. Riley might have a different view of that, but what does she know? So that would be, so I think that's an adequate solution. And I, although we have discussed, it's clearly been implicit all the way. I, for one, have never thought about it in terms of the statute. I've just thought about it what I have thought was commonsensically the way we were going. So I think it's worth taking a fresh look. And I think the way that Commissioner McHugh suggested, is relatively cost-free, and let's do that.
And the notification will go to everybody who has, obviously, everybody who has been designated, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But everybody who has petitioned,
Yeah.
and what about those who have not?
So I
And
think
have-
that's the universe. We have people who have been designated, people who have reached agreements, or people who have petitioned. And that would be the totality of who is provided notice tomorrow.
Well, everybody's, the
well-
whole world's going to get noticed, but it's going to include these people.
Right, but the notice was formal, and that's also statutory language, isn't it?
Just to be clear, so what I had anticipated, which was, if you had hearings on December 3rd, 4th, or 5th, we would have had to determine who is a surrounding community
Yeah, no, we got it.
before 3rd, 4th, or
Yeah,
5th.
no, we got you.
And if we couldn't do it, then it'd have to be
We
postponed.
got you. Yeah, we got you. And this all came up in the context, or largely, of live entertainment venues, but I assume everything we've discussed here applies to live entertainment venues equally?
Yes, it has the similar process.
Okay. So I'm going to suggest that we take Commissioner McHugh's suggestion. Let's tee this up to discuss it. Michael Sanglang, you back there? We need to put out a notice, a request on the website for input on this topic. And we will go ahead and give the announcement for the second, third, and fourth, but understand that we may rethink that based on what we come up with next week.
So how many communities, remind me, this was part of your remarks, I believe, but how many communities have petitioned but not been determined to be?
I don't know. I anticipate more than a handful by the end of the day. I've received probably 3 or 4, one or two in the context of this meeting.
Say a couple per applicant?
Yeah, more for some, yeah.
You made reference to this, but I just wanted to bring it up. We've received, and I've received, and I think passed around at least 2 communities saying that they felt that there was not, potential surrounding communities saying that they felt there was not the time to do the adequate study, peer review, whatever work had to be done, and requesting that our entire process be postponed by 6 months. Your reaction to that, to those requests is what?
I think what we should hear from the applicants on how they are prepared to deal with our deadlines next week. I think that if you take a look at 6-month delay, we would be here next October making decisions on the license. And just as the rule of thumb, if we're expecting $300 to $500 million of revenues for the Commonwealth per year, a 6-month delay might result in excess of $100 million in revenues that is not available to the Commonwealth or to cities and towns. In addition, there would be thousands of jobs that would be delayed by 6 months. That said, I certainly do understand out there that there is a tremendous amount of pressure between now and December 31st on conducting the studies, getting the studies, and trying to figure that out. Pressure that regional planning agencies have said this may not be able to be possible by December 31st. There are some periods after our December 31st application date by which agreements could be reached, but I think that we do need to hear very carefully from our applicants to see where they are in providing information to communities so that they can have a reasonable period of time to understand that. Because what we've learned is if the information is not available to those communities, what will happen is that we have a lot of surrounding community petitions, and that delays our process. And one of the recommendations why we're focusing on this 30 days is because every day that the process after our application, that we have to allocate for that process after our application, it prevents flexibility before the application to allow parties to have those conversations. We can't add here and add here. It just doesn't work unless we extend our deadlines and our award of licenses very, very significantly, resulting in the loss of opportunities for employment and revenues.
Right. Well, I'm painfully aware of the costs of delaying, but apropos of these two letters, the real issue is, what's your informed judgment about whether there is the time to go? We know it's tight. We've been dealing with this now for months, but in good faith, I mean, is it possible to get these done if people go at it with good faith?
I don't think we'll have agreements concluded by December 31st for all communities, given our current timetable, given that a number of the studies have not even started yet.
But we have a proactive role in that, in the terms of designating or not
Yes,
a surrounding community.
yeah.
I mean, sooner than later, you mean?
Well, eventually, whenever. I mean, you're only talking about those communities that we determine to be a surrounding community and have not reached an agreement. Is that a fair statement?
I think there are a number of communities that have been designated by the applicants or will soon be designated by the applicants.
Yep.
And even with those, it may be difficult to reach some conclusions by December 31st. Now, one thing that Council Blue and Blue have been talking about is that there are things that are known or are knowable and things that are not knowable by December 31st. And what you'll see from even the agreement that you see in front of you is that one of the applicants is trying to make an agreement that says, hey, even though by our application deadline, we won't know certain things, within a year, we can come back and say, what were the actual impacts? And can we mitigate those actual impacts rather than trying to predict the future right now? Because even though with a traffic study, it is a lot more concrete in being able to predict things, but from a housing situation, a lot of the social impacts, it is very, very difficult to make these predictions of what you need to do for mitigation. And so I think what we have been trying to counsel people is know as much as you can know now so you can address those impacts now, but there'll be certain things that you just cannot predict with a degree of certainty that would lead to a really good agreement. And perhaps there are measures that lawyers can take to find ways to mitigate those impacts.
I mean, to me, that is, I'm sorry, you finished.
Well, I'm not as worried on those because the designation has already you know, the applicant has
Right.
acknowledged that
Yeah.
that they're a surrounding community, and,
Yeah.
and it's important details, but I think it occurs to me that, you know, going back after a year is a very reasonable approach.
Yeah.
I guess I keep thinking of the ones that have petitioned and the applicant has not agreed to,
Yes.
because they're looking at different studies or in existing studies.
Right.
And we have to make a determination that they are or are not a surrounding community.
Yes.
If we determine that they are not,
Yeah.
the issue is gone. But if we determine that they are, then there really needs to be this, you know, time clock that starts. So that's critical.
So if we determine that they are, they have 30 days after the application?
That's right. That's right. And the longer that we don't determine, you know, the longer that our decisions, our ultimate ability to award the license gets being postponed.
Yeah, I agree with that, and but I think we can see an impending risk here on January 10th, clearly. But I do also think that both for schedule purposes, and for substantive purposes, the idea of in effect postponing the arbitration process for a year, you know, if a surrounding community and an applicant are at loggerheads, and time's a wasting, and other problems are being created by them not resolving, having there be a new negotiation a year later, which includes the binding arbitration feature that is in place now, is a really good solution. I mean, it's a really good way out to both make sure there's much more facts on the table, and that we don't get our schedule screwed up. So I think the idea of encouraging surrounding communities and applicants who are having trouble coming to an agreement in a timely fashion, encouraging with some force the idea of let's do this a year later with the binding arbitration clause is very, very powerful and very persuasive and reasonable, and serves everybody's interests, including ours and the Commonwealth's.
And what Council Blue and I have been talking about is perhaps having our outside counsel just provide us a little bit more of an independent advice of how those clauses
Could
could
get
be
structured,
structured
yeah.
to give the benefits that we're thinking about to
Yeah.
communities, and that might be a way.
I think that would-
And again, I think you should try to know what is knowable
Right.
as soon as you can, so you structure a better agreement, but there's certain things you just won't be able to know.
Right. And particularly in the ones where there's hostility, when there isn't good faith negotiations going on, or when it's at least modified by passion, good faith is modified by passion, having this kind of a system alternative in place would help too.
Right.
I think it's a great idea. If we could come up with a template, and including the binding arbitration feature, I think is really important, because the operator, no operator is going to like the idea of, you know, an unknown factor out there that's going to be bound on them, that's going to change their cash flow calculations 30 days down the road, a year down the road. But they're stuck with it now. They've got it now. So if they just postpone it for a year, it's really not a big difference. But putting together a template that we could give to applicants in surrounding communities that address these, I think is a really good idea. Sooner than later, I think.
Was that the brevity of your remarks?
My remarks were pretty short.
Yeah. Do you serve lunch with your brevity? Okay, was that it, John?
That's it.
Okay. Then we move on to item number 7, General Counsel Blue.
I think we addressed the impacted live entertainment venue issues. Did we cover what you wanted, John, in that?
Well, I think so. Todd, there was an issue regarding our impacted live entertainment venues do not have a 10-day period specified for responses by the applicants. Is that what you were going to bring up?
That's right. I would just note that you have actually gotten 2 petitions for impacted live entertainment venue status. One has been resolved, one is still outstanding. So at some point, you know, the commission will have to address that, but that
John, those petitions, like, were they in the packet or just?
No,
No.
they were not, you
No.
may not even have seen them at this point. They came from the Massachusetts Performing Arts Coalition, who represents two venues, the South Shore Music Circus in Cohasset and the Hanover Theater in Worcester. The Hanover Theater has entered into an agreement with Cordish, and they've withdrawn their petition. There is an outstanding petition from the South Shore Music Circus relative to Raynham. We've discussed that with the representatives from Raynham, and they will, I've been told, reach out to the petitioner to see what headway can be made along those lines. So hopefully we'll be able to get some kind of update on that shortly. So you really only have one outstanding petition that I'm aware of.
Director Day, I talked about this with somebody, I forget who it was, but we don't have in-house capacity to help us make a decision about whether somebody, expert capacity, whether a venue should be a live entertainment venue or not, impacted live entertainment venue or not. Unlike the surrounding community agreements, where with our regional planning agencies and state agencies and our consultants, we have a lot of capacity to do that. So I don't quite know where we turn for help in determining whether somebody should be an impacted live entertainment venue or not. And thinking about who is out there, either, just as a citizen who might be willing to help or a consultant who might be willing to help. I think we might need that help.
We may, but what I recall from the main concerns from the coalition was that this was a supply side problem, not necessarily the number of seats or the number of the characteristics of the venue, and that could easily be addressed via a memorandum of understanding or some kind of other document by agreement.
Yeah, but we don't know, how much they pay is too much. I mean, it might be we don't need help, but we might need help. And if we need help, we don't have any place to turn at this point. So,
I guess I always thought of it as some kind of non-compete agreement, for those acts. So, that could all be described in some kind of contract.
well, we'll see. I don't know. I don't know what the debates will be, but it's just something we need to think about. All right, that's live entertainment venues, and we have racing license format.
So in your package under Section 7, there is a template for racing license applications decisions. We talked, I don't think the last meeting, but the meeting before, that the commission preferred a decisional type of a license agreement as opposed to what currently exists, which is a kind of a wall plaque with a number of days and a few other determining issues. This decisional format is based upon the formats we use for suitability and other decisions out of the commission. It's designed for the commission to have this, but you would also receive a memorandum of recommendation from Director Dernberger as to what she recommends in terms of your action on the racing license application. You would also have a summary of the public hearings that we held on the racing license applications, and those would be our exhibits that you would use to make your decision. Racing license applications are awarded, as I understand from the past, not in an adjudicatory proceeding, but in a public meeting, so the commission would vote on whether to award. And I believe the next step in the process would be for us to document your vote in a decision that looks like this. So I wanted to make sure you had this format before next week. Now, at November 7th, the next meeting, I have asked each of the racing license applicants to appear. The question before the commission would be, you can ask them questions. If you had specific questions, we could ask them to be prepared in advance. But they will all be here next week, so that if you choose to ask them questions about their racing applications, you can do so.
I've heard Jennifer referring to issues like we've never dealt with a conditional application before, that we want a license to operate, but it will only use it if we get a gaming license. I think one of them is applying for a fewer number of racing days than have typically been licensed in the past. Do we have a context for making those decisions? Or will we have a context?
You will have Jennifer's recommendation memo that should address some of those issues.
All right.
She should be making a recommendation to you on that.
Okay. Because it's one we sort of know has been coming, but in the preoccupation with the gaming licenses, I at least haven't spent any time thinking about this yet. Okay.
So this is just the format you're
Yes.
seeking? And does this format contemplate that a license of the old type will also issue?
It will, because that's the type that has to be posted at the location. So yes, the old type will go out, but this would allow
But this
you to place conditions
Right.
or,
This would back it up.
yes,
Right.
that's right.
I think it's a good idea. It's a good format.
Okay. Anything else, Counselor?
No, that's it.
Okay, item 8, anything else that we missed?
I don't want to decide this today, but I do want to raise it for consideration for next week, and that is a recurring issue for our evaluation team, and maybe others have run into it as well, and that is variances between material that was included in the public presentations of
yeah.
a development and material that's in the application. In some cases, there are things presented that were presented in the public meeting and contained in the slideshows that are not contained in the application. In other cases, there are things in, for example, in the host community agreement that are different from the things in the application. How do we deal with those kinds of variances? I would very much like to discuss that next week. Because it impacts on not only the ultimate award, but it impacts on the analysis that goes in. What are we supposed to be analyzing? And what hypotheticals are we supposed to take into account in the analysis process? So I think we need to come up with a policy that
Yeah, that's a
deals
really
with
good point.
Yeah, that's a good topic that I had raised and I've had in mind for the next meeting relative to a couple of policy decisions that we have to make based on what is included in some of the projections, at least on the finance piece as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought this up, and it's complicated. I mean, one of the
Right.
most dramatic examples is the Leominster proposal, where we're getting people complaining that the HCA and the referendum may not have been appropriate because it wasn't on this 26-acre site, the extra 10 acres, and then I find out, I didn't even realize that the application doesn't have the extra 10 acres in it. So, or whatever, but anyway, so we've got to figure out what we can, what are we entertaining, and what do we do with this, ad hoc information that comes in over the transom? But also, there's debates about if we do accept the ad hoc, then there's debates about that, so it's a complicated issue. So are you guys gonna give us some advice on that?
We can do that, yes.
Okay. Anything else? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Can't say go Red Sox. Red Sox
No,
win.
I know.
Sucks, man.
I'll miss them.
You got a lot of